Today, we focus on East Asia, one of the planet's most perplexing and tense regions. A new twist in the complex dynamic of China, North Korea, and Russia has emerged, and it might just be the biggest shakeup in years. Rumors are swirling that China is furious with North Korea for providing military support to Russia. The question is, how is Beijing responding to Pyongyang's increasingly bold moves? And why does it look like chaos is brewing on the Korean Peninsula? Buckle in, because what seems like a simple three-way alliance might be far more complicated than it appears. A falling out, or even a shift in dynamics between China and North Korea could reshape regional power and spark new tensions in East Asia. Today, we'll take a comprehensive look at this simmering situation, from the deep historical ties that bind North Korea and China, to the reasons behind Pyongyang's growing courtship with Moscow, and, ultimately, the ways in which Beijing may be pulling strings behind the scenes to cause chaos for North Korea. By the end, we hope to unpack one of the most volatile trilateral relationships in modern geopolitics. To truly understand why Beijing might be pressuring or causing chaos in North Korea, we must examine the roots of the China-North Korea relationship. In the early 1950s, as the Korean War raged, China's intervention under the banner of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army proved pivotal for North Korea. Had Beijing not sent troops, UN forces led primarily by the United States might have overrun the North altogether. This intervention was not just about saving a communist ally. Mao Zedong, China's leader at the time, believed that if North Korea fell to the west, the next battlefield could well be the northeastern provinces of China. Meanwhile, North Korea's founding leader, Kim Il-sung, owed an immense debt of gratitude to Mao's forces for keeping his regime from collapsing. This interdependency led to what has often been described as a lips and teeth relationship. If the lips are gone, the teeth get cold. In practical terms, Pyongyang served as a buffer state for Beijing, insulating China from direct confrontation with the US-allied South Korea. As the decades passed, China became North Korea's principal trading partner, providing critical food supplies, cooking oil, and fuel. Even after Beijing began to open its economy under Deng Xiaoping in the late 1970s, North Korea remained committed to its doctrine of juche, or self-reliance, which ironically meant it had to rely heavily on Chinese aid. When international sanctions against Pyongyang stiffened over its pursuit of nuclear weapons, China often acted as North Korea's unofficial economic lifeline. Smuggling networks thrived, allowing Pyongyang to skirt the harshest effects of global restrictions. But it's important to note that Beijing did not support North Korea purely out of charity. A collapsed North Korea could unleash a flood of refugees across the Yalu River, destabilizing China's border regions. Furthermore, if the Kim regime fell and the two Koreas were reunified under a system aligned with the United States, Beijing would find itself surrounded by US influence right on its doorstep. Despite this long-standing relationship, friction arose over North Korea's nuclear ambitions. While China had frequently expressed reservations about Pyongyang's missile tests and nuclear detonations, those criticisms have often been mild. Beijing may prefer a non-nuclear North Korea, but it fears a destabilized or collapsed North Korea even more. Thus, it has repeatedly supported sanctions in name, yet routinely watered them down or circumvented them when it believed the survival of the Kim regime was in jeopardy. For years, this arrangement mostly held. Beijing may roll its eyes at North Korea's provocations, but it has consistently prevented any real economic disaster from befalling Pyongyang. This brings us to the present conundrum. Rumors suggest that China is now causing chaos in North Korea in response to Pyongyang's rumored support for Russia. On paper, one might expect China and Russia to stand together with North Korea in opposition to the US-led order. However, China's leadership has been painstakingly cultivating an image of a responsible global power, maintaining extensive trade ties with Europe, the United States, and many others. While Beijing has quietly supported Russia's positions on certain global issues, it has also tried to avoid overt military entanglement or anything that might jeopardize its vital economic interest overseas. In contrast, North Korea, seeking relief from sanctions, sees Russia as a valuable partner, potentially providing energy, diplomatic cover at the UN, and possibly advanced military technology. From North Korea's perspective, a tighter relationship with Moscow offers intriguing benefits. Both countries are heavily sanctioned outcasts internationally, generating a sense of shared defiance. North Korea, desperate for energy resources such as oil and gas, sees Russia's abundant reserves as a potential lifeline. Diplomatic perks also come into play. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council, Russia can veto or dilute resolutions to further sanction Pyongyang. And from Moscow's vantage point, every alliance counts. North Korea's support, however limited on a material level, symbolically helps Russia claim it is not as isolated as Western powers contend. Even the possibility of small-scale North Korean artillery or ammunition making its way to the Russian front could be seen as strategically valuable. While it would seem that both China and Russia could benefit from exerting their collective influence over North Korea, thereby forming a potentially formidable triple alliance against U.S. interests, Beijing's immediate goals do not perfectly align with Moscow's. China loathes instability. It wants a certain measure of respectability on the world stage. Any major escalation on the Korean Peninsula, especially one linked to North Korean actions backed by Russia, could trigger a strong response from Washington and its allies, potentially increasing the U.S. military presence in East Asia. This has led to speculation that China, wary of losing control over its unpredictable neighbor, might be quietly stirring the pot to cause chaos in North Korea. China's leadership has carefully crafted the narrative that it is a responsible power. For Beijing, global trade relationships and economic growth are paramount. A close alliance with an aggressive, heavily sanctioned Russia carries serious risks for China. From further straining its ties with Western nations is prompting the U.S. and its allies to strengthen their military presence around China's borders. By courting Russia too openly, North Korea risks dragging China into a conflict posture with the West that Beijing may not be prepared to handle. While China might share some interests with Russia, particularly in countering what they see as U.S. hegemony, Beijing still wants flexibility. If North Korea's actions go too far, Beijing becomes guilty by association, potentially facing more sanctions or jeopardizing its massive trade partnerships. Moreover, Beijing is wary of any shift that loosens its hold over Pyongyang. The Chinese Communist Party has long been the dominant patron of the Kim regime, and a stronger North Korea-Russia alliance could erode China's influence. Behind the scenes, China has numerous tools it can deploy to pressure North Korea. Pyongyang's economy hinges on the regular flow of Chinese goods, food, fuel, and more. Any disruption can lead to immediate shortages and soaring prices, alarming both the North Korean elite and the general population. Beijing's economic grip serves as a powerful reminder to Kim Jong-un that, despite Moscow's support, North Korea still depends on China for survival. Additional ways China could cause chaos include quietly encouraging internal dissent among North Korean elites who favor Beijing over Moscow. Tightening border security and clamping down on cross-border smuggling is crucial for Pyongyang's illicit revenue streams. Quietly shifting its diplomatic stance at the UN to allow harsher language against North Korea, or at least not shielding Pyongyang as effectively as before. Potentially using cyber or surveillance operations to disrupt North Korean financial networks that might be funneling support to Russia. In recent months, several international media outlets and think tanks have pointed to telltale signs of tension between Beijing and Pyongyang. While no major publication has run a headline explicitly declaring China unleashes chaos in North Korea for helping Russia, the speculative whispers have been loud enough to attract global attention. Recent reports from outlets like NK News and Radio Free Asia suggest minor but telling economic or logistical disruptions along the Sino-North Korean border. Possible reductions in train and truck traffic from China to North Korea. Stricter inspections that slow or halt the flow of essential goods. Subtle critiques in Chinese state-run media that caution Pyongyang against escalating tensions. Washington keeps a close eye on any sign of discord between Beijing and Pyongyang, as that can open diplomatic opportunities, or at least reduce the immediate threat from North Korea's missiles and nuclear capabilities. If China is exerting real pressure, the United States might see it as a chance to push for new talks or negotiations. On the other hand, a cornered North Korea might respond with missile tests or other provocations to rally support at home and show the world it won't be ignored or pressured into submission. But the situation remains unpredictable. Any shift in North Korea's stance could have effects across the region. South Korea, always on high alert due to its heavily fortified border with the North, watches closely for any changes that could either ease or escalate tensions. If North Korea is too preoccupied with its struggles, Seoul might get a temporary break from missile tests. Yet escalation remains a real danger if Kim feels he has no choice but to prove his regime's strength. Meanwhile, Japan, also within range of North Korea's missiles, closely monitors each development. Russia has a lot to gain if it can pull North Korea away from China without sparking a direct conflict with Beijing. Strengthening ties with Pyongyang could secure Russian support in global forums and provide much-needed ammunition and equipment for ongoing wars. However, Moscow must tread carefully. China is one of its key trade partners and a crucial ally against Western sanctions. A serious fallout with Beijing could backfire, complicating Russia's long-term strategy. All these interlinked interests means that the region sits on a knife's edge. Even incremental change in Beijing's posture could send outsized ripples. If, for example, China truly decides to crack down on trade corridors that feed the North Korean military, Kim Jong-un might strengthen his ties with Russia, further straining his relationship with Beijing. In an extreme scenario, one could imagine North Korea ramping up nuclear tests or ballistic missile launches as a show of defiance, dragging the US and its allies deeper into the standoff. China could then face the unpleasant choice of either stepping in to soothe tensions, which might appear to side with North Korea and Russia, or letting matters spiral, risking a large-scale crisis on its border. It's equally plausible that China's tactics will remain indirect: minor fluctuations in trade, occasional harsh editorials in state media, or quiet instructions to local authorities to tighten cross-border commerce. This type of controlled pressure can remind Pyongyang that its economic and political lifeline truly comes from Beijing, not Moscow. Kim Jong-un might then carefully dial back any overt support for Russia, contenting himself with verbal declarations of solidarity rather than tangible arms deals or other steps that clearly implicate him. Historically, North Korea has sometimes tried to pit Beijing and Moscow against each other, leveraging their rivalry or differences for better economic deals or political concessions. The war in Ukraine has raised the stakes. If Moscow can offer Pyongyang meaningful financial or technological rewards in exchange for arms or at least diplomatic coverage, Kim might consider it worth testing China's limits. After all, China would be hard-pressed to abandon North Korea fully. But that line of thinking can also backfire if Beijing decides it can no longer tolerate Pyongyang's opportunistic behavior. China might not want to topple Kim Jong-un, but it can make life difficult enough for Pyongyang, so Kim must reconsider how he's willing to push the Russian connection. Even small gestures from Beijing, like ramped-up border inspections or more rigorous enforcement of UN sanctions, can send a strong message. From a global perspective, observers should watch for sudden changes in North Korea's import patterns from China, unexpected rocket or nuclear tests by Pyongyang, and new rhetorical approaches from Beijing. Any abrupt halt in cross-border traffic or an unusual spike in the price of fuel inside North Korea could signal that Beijing has decided to twist Pyongyang's arm. Diplomatic cables, statements from international leaders, and new positions taken by China at the UN could also hint at shifting sands in this precarious alliance. That said, a major meltdown is by no means guaranteed. In the game of high-stakes geopolitics, sometimes the mere threat of economic strangulation is enough to force smaller players back into line. Kim Jong-un might realize that risking China's economic safety net is far more dangerous than angering the West or even letting down Russia's expectations. He may softly pivot away from overt dealings with Moscow, focusing instead on symbolic rhetoric condemning Western aggression, while avoiding concrete arms supplies or other steps that clearly implicate him. On the other hand, If Kim sees an opening to get tangible benefits from Russia, advanced military technology, currency infusions, or guaranteed fuel shipments, he might test just how far Beijing is willing to go. That brinkmanship, though, could push Beijing into retaliation, igniting a crisis neither side can easily control. In that event, the US, South Korea, and Japan would move into higher alert, possibly conducting more frequent joint military drills. At the same time, Russia might try to further assure Kim that it can meet his needs without China's involvement. This scenario would raise the risk of miscalculations and potentially push the entire region closer to conflict. Ultimately, none of the players involved in this triangle appears eager for an outright collapse of the North Korean regime. China wants stability. Russia wants an ally who can at least offer symbolic, if not substantive support. And even the United States, for all its rhetoric against Pyongyang, does not relish the prospect of a sudden and chaotic power vacuum on the Korean Peninsula. That scenario could bring about a humanitarian disaster, the risk of unsecured nuclear material, or a dangerous multi-power confrontation over who controls the post-collapse territory. The potential for a drastic power realignment in East Asia if China and North Korea's lips and teeth bond truly ruptures, spreading far beyond the peninsula and reshaping global alliances. So, are we on the brink of a major crisis in East Asia? Caution is wise. International politics can shift unexpectedly, particularly when multiple actors with nuclear capabilities are involved. The interplay of domestic pressures, leadership personalities, and global economic trends can push even long-standing alliances in surprising directions. Yet, it would be premature to declare an imminent rupture based on rumor alone. Beijing, Pyongyang, and Moscow might find a face-saving arrangement that maintains a veneer of unity against the West, while each pursues its unique goals. Suppose China truly wants to prevent a deeper entanglement of North Korea in Russia's war efforts. In that case, it will likely continue with delicate, targeted measures, enough to inconvenience Kim. In response, Kim may make token public gestures that keep up appearances with Russia, but refrain from delivering the kind of robust military or material support that would cause Beijing genuine alarm. This scenario, a calibrated balancing act, could drag on for months or even years, leaving the Korean Peninsula in its familiar, if precarious, state of cold confrontation with the outside world. Meanwhile, the rest of the region, South Korea, Japan, and even Taiwan, will brace for fallout. Any significant crack in the China-North Korea relationship could shift alliances and defense strategies, prompting renewed calls for expanded missile defense systems and enhanced U.S. presence. Diplomatic openings might arise, but so could a dangerous escalation if Pyongyang decides to reassert itself through nuclear brinkmanship. The fate of millions could hint on how these three powers resolve their differences, manage their overlapping ambitions, or fail to do so. That's why the world must watch not just the overt statements from Beijing, Pyongyang, and Moscow, but the undercurrents. The slowdowns or surges in cross-border trade, the behind-the-scenes moves of the UN. All could be potent of signs that this tension is simply another chapter in the long drama of East Asia's balance of power politics. The situation in East Asia is shifting rapidly, and what seems stable today could unravel in an instant. Small provocations could ignite major conflicts, and alliances that once appeared unshakable may fracture under global pressure. So, stay informed, stay sharp, and keep watching, because the Korean Peninsula has been a flashpoint before and may be on the verge of another crisis. As these power struggles unfold, their ripple effects could reshape the geopolitical landscape. In a world where even whispers of chaos can spark real consequences, the stakes have never been higher. Only time will tell how it all plays out. What do you think will happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest developments.